happy people cook happy food. I mean, that's a fact. When you're in culinary school and you're moving up the ranks, you're always worried about honing your skills technically, right? But truthfully is when you're a leader, you have to hone in on your communication skills and how to bring your team in. Really have a vision of what your kitchen's supposed to look like. All right, so I know that you guys think that I was born like cooking at my grandmother's kind of apron strings, right? But the truth is that I told you in chapter 1 that I very much learned how to cook at a later age. When I left my house, I knew how to eat, and I knew how to eat really well. But when I moved out, I started to learn how to cook from watching Lydia Bastianich on television. And the first thing I ever made was risotto stuffed tomatoes. And I'll never forget that night. It was me, a bottle of Chianti, Michael Bublé, not in the house, but playing on. And I was just like in my glory learning, how to make this. That half an hour episode that she had probably took me, 2.5 hours to make, but it was like glorious. It was my first time experiencing like food nourishing my soul from my own hands. So I was working at a law firm at the time. I don't know if you guys know this, but I went to college and my parents really wanted me to be a lawyer. When I was, 5 or 6 years old, my mother was late picking me up from the bus stop, and the principal said, Ayesha could walk and talk her way out of anything. She'll make a great lawyer. And from then it was just like, that was what I was going to be. And I kind of was okay with that. But then I was working at the law firm and I was seeing kind of like what their demeanor was. And I was like, I don't know that I want to do this. So I do what everybody tells you to do. Go home and write down on a piece of paper, the things that excite you. And in this order, I wrote music, diamonds, and cooking. I've always loved music. Music is part of my life. I played instruments when I was young. I played the flute and piano, a little bit more so the flute. And then diamonds, you guys know, I love the bling. And I went to the New York Gemology School and I was like, oh my God, I want to study diamonds. And the lady really laughed at me and she said, that's not how it works. You study gems. And I was like, oh, forget that. And then the cooking thing happened and I went to the Institute of Culinary Education and I walked in and I kind of, this woman, Linda Simon, took me through the school and she gave me kind of a tour and I was like, this is amazing. So I went to work from 9 to 5 and then I went to ICE, the Institute of Culinary Education, from 6 to 10. And it was there in culinary school that I didn't know that I wanted to be a chef, but I wanted to learn more about cooking and have like this type of experience, a more intimate relationship with food, if you will. So in one of the modules, they have you stage, which means that you go to a restaurant for the day. And I went to for Lydia because obviously I was obsessed with Lydia. And I remember like working through the day. And then at some point during service, I was stuck between the dish pit and the pasta station. And I had watched this symphony, kind of like the first time if you ever went to a ballet. And I watched the chef expedite in Italian and guys were responding in Spanish and the clamoring of the pans and the noisiness. But then it was like this unspoken symphony of this gorgeous food approaching the past. And it was at that moment I knew that I wanted to be a chef. So as you can see, we're making fresh pasta today with these gorgeous farm fresh eggs. And why are we making pasta? Because the beginning of my career starts with this obsession with pasta. It's like flour, eggs, and water, and what millions of possibilities can happen. And at Lydia, pasta was like the gold standard. Like if you made it to the pasta station, like you were the best cook in the kitchen. And my whole goal of working at that restaurant was to do both. It was to learn how to make pasta proper and to work on the pasta station. And I could say that I achieved both for sure. Culinary school was amazing, but culinary school doesn't teach you about what restaurant life is like, what everyday life was like in the restaurant, and damn, was it hard. When I worked at Lydia, I was the only girl in the kitchen. I worked with a bunch of talented guys who really taught me a lot, but they weren't so open in teaching me. It was kind of like, let's see what she has, and let's see if she's deserving of the lessons. And I worked hard. I had my hands down, my head down. Every day I tried to like either continue to work on a skill set, like my knife skills, and then simultaneously watching other stations and what they were doing so that I can learn from what they were doing. The hours were long. It was tough on the mind, tough on the body. And I was like in a situation where I felt like I was marking my own barometer of success. My chef was amazing, but it wasn't a kind of culture where they would take you and sit you down and be like, you're doing so good today, and this is what you have to do to be better. It was more all by trial by fire. And I really allowed my passion to kind of like fuel my desire to stay, to be honest with you. And it was like, it's a very competitive, they were very competitive kitchens, but I think I thrived in that motion. And was I the only girl there? 100%. And was it really difficult? It was, but it definitely had benefits. I learned a lot from my chefs. Everybody says like not everybody, but a lot of people talk about when you work for someone else, you learn all the things not to do. I learned both. It wasn't that I learned the things of what not to do, but there were certain things in the kitchen that I wanted to make sure that when I got my turn at bat that I would change. Hand rolling this pasta is really very nostalgic in its own way. We didn't have the kind of things that like everybody has now, right? There was no internet then. Like if you wanted to learn something, if you wanted to find a technique, like you would work in the restaurant 16 hours easily and you would never complain about it. You would almost be happy to have a job where you were surrounded by greatness. Like people that were doing this job so many years longer than you had. It was hard. It was a very difficult job, like emotionally and definitely physically. And nobody can tell you, or like, there's no training for that part of it. One of the first things I think I learned was like separating emotions from rationale. And a lot of times, like when you were getting yelled at by your chef for doing something wrong, it was like you wanted to take it so personal. And you did, but like you could never cry, even though you wanted to. I remember like taking the train home from 57th and Lexington and kind of like had my hair up as a pineapple, but I used to have a bandana on. And I remember like taking my hair down and like pieces of porcelain plates would come out from like the throwing of dishes. And I would like really like cry all the way home. And that's a lot, 57th and Lex all the way to Gravesend. And I just would be like emotionally done. But simultaneously, like I felt so grateful because I was learning so much. Even though I was the only girl in the kitchen, I think I proved myself not only through obviously that I was passionate, but like my aptitude to learn really quickly, like to ask questions. At that time when you would choose to work in a restaurant, you would never, like there was like a rule of thumb that you could never put a restaurant on your resume if you didn't work there for at least a year. And in hindsight, like a year felt like an eternity. But the truth is that there was so much to learn all the time. If you worked in a place, like you could learn how to butcher, you could learn how to make pasta, you could learn pastry, like you could learn how to work the grill. And it was like giving yourself enough time on each station to really absorb all of that information. But the truth is that like in each kitchen that you worked in, like you would realize like how important leadership was, how important it was to like, I felt that like when you're working for someone else, it's not always that your voice is being heard. You're cooking someone else's food and their identity, and you have to like realize that those are kind of like growing pains, right? It's kind of like starting school all over again, like from the first grade all the way up to college. You're taking these on-the-job experiences to really broaden your culinary prowess. In my career, I was very fortunate to pick like really great restaurants to work in. At the time, you would see like the stars, New York Times stars, Michelin stars would really like guide you in what restaurant you wanted to learn in. And, obviously I was obsessed with pasta and Italian food, but I also like wanted to learn French technique. So I worked at Michelin for a while, which was 2 Michelin stars in New York. But I think it's important a little bit to talk about like kitchen culture and the culture that I grew up in. Like I have one foot in old school and one in new school now, right? But when I came up, like I was old school kitchen, like we're yelling and screaming and throwing pans were kind of normal culture. And to be honest with you, like I kind of conditioned myself to thrive in those environments because the last thing you wanted to do was make your chef angry. But simultaneously, like he wasn't yelling or she wasn't yelling at you just because, it was because they wanted your outcome to be perfect every single time. There was something about that culture that I realized that wasn't sustainable. When I had my first job as executive chef, I adopted the same culture that was given to me. So I was yelling and screaming, throwing things, and I realized that like I might have thrived in that kind of environment, but that's not an environment that you want to work in or doesn't sustain longevity at all. So how do you make that change? What do you take out of the old and bring to the new that creates a culture in your own kitchens that's healthy, sustainable. And also, listen, happy people cook happy food. I mean, that's a fact. But it was really like Chouquette that kind of taught me to change my ways. I mean, I'd already adopted a better kitchen culture when Chouka was born, but I wanted to create a happy environment at Chouquette. Like, I wanted this vibe where you felt that you were going to have a party. But if I wasn't happy and I wasn't feeling the party, then how could my cooks feel the same way? When I came up, the kitchens were tough. Like, there was nobody that you could talk to. Like, if you were having problems with someone in your kitchen or your chef or whatever, like, you almost like had to keep your mouth shut. Like, there was never a situation where you can talk to them. The other, like, disparity that always, like, was a little bit off for me was like how important like we were as a team. There was always like this big thing, like the chef is here and then everybody else was here. And I knew that when I got my turn at bat, like this discrepancy doesn't make any sense because you're in it together. And yes, obviously that has to be someone that is the leader in the kitchen, someone that's going to take, you know, the most responsibility, and that's where there's a chef there and a brigade. But that being said, like being part of this team and making people feel valued and heard was like really important to me. And some of it was like really small things. Like I told you about my father with the handshake. It was also like when you're talking to someone, looking them in the eye. You know, in my kitchens, whether you come to stage or whether I'm there, when I come, I say hello and shake everybody's hands. And I do the same when I leave. And I remember working for like a specific chef, and he would like at the end of the night like kind of disappear. And like you just went through war with this guy, 300 covers, and the least he could do was say, "Good night, everybody, thank you." It didn't have to be personal, but it made you feel like less valued. And I, you know, really took that to heart when I was a cook, and I promised myself that when I got my own kitchen, that I would definitely, absolutely make sure that I said hello and goodbye to everybody, that I would look people in the eye and tell them how valued they were. And it's like small things like that. When you're in culinary school and you're moving up the ranks, you're always worried about honing your skills technically, right? But truthfully is when you're a leader, you have to hone in on your communication skills and how to bring your team in and really have a vision of what your kitchen is supposed to look like. Beautiful. I mean, in true chef fashion, I'm eating out of the pan. But honestly, like, you guys watch this from start to finish. Eggs, flour, a little bit of olive oil, and look what happened. This is the most simplest form of pasta with butter and cheese that you can have. Hold on, let me get a bite. The level of satisfaction that you get from something that you've made with your two hands that's so simple is something that sometimes cannot be explained. It's like an emotional vortex of feelings. You know, Italian food obviously is part of my culture, but at this point of my career, there was like so much more that I was yearning for. I didn't master anything. I was a student of the craft, but I was learning and yearning for more flavor, more technique, more leadership. More opportunities for me to get as a female chef, you know, at the head of these kitchens. And I feel like this middle chapter only opened the doors for more chapters to come. And just like this pasta, I knew that I was ready to take the next step to really show the world my own culinary voice. Got to be an all the way. Got to be an all the way. I just wanted you to know like how thin that is.
Yeah.
So I've done that by hand.